All right, we are going to be tackling some trees in watercolor. I want to teach you techniques that you can use to make all of these trees, but I am going to break down each tree for you to make sure that you've got all the assistance that you need. Today I've got my sketchbook with me. This is just a sketchbook from Amazon. It's got cold press, heavy duty, I believe it's 140 pound, maybe 120 pound paper inside. I've got two brushes on hand. I've got my 8 and my 2. I'll most likely be using my 8 for as much as possible because I like to stick to a big brush for as long as I can. Today I am using my Daniel Smith watercolor set. They're hand poured, but I bought a travel set, so they're in pans. I did have one tube that I filled myself. It came with some open spots, which was super handy. I've got my cup of water, I've got a tissue, and I've got my heat gun. So let's start breaking down these trees. First, I want to start with my lightest value of green. So I've got some green. I like to mix a bit of brown with my green when I'm painting trees because then it looks a little more muted and less vibrant. So I'm going to take some of my raw umber and put it into my, which green is this? It's not Viridian. It's not sap green. Hooker's dark, maybe? I'll check. I was wrong. It's sap green. So some raw umber into my sap green here because that'll make it just feel a bit more natural. So I like that combo. You can do any green you want, of course. All right, so I'm going to water it down quite a bit because I want my first value, my first layer to be the lightest value. Now for this first tree, you'll notice it's a triangle shape, but each layer is kind of its own section. So I like to start, I'm using the tip of my brush, and I like to poke in the shape of a triangle. So here's my top triangle. I'm going to give it a little bit of space. Maybe do another little, kind of like a stripe. But each stripe, each section is made out of a blob that gets a little bit wider. And as I get lower, maybe it'll get a little bit more funky. I don't want each one to be super perfect. Also, if there was a lot of water in this first one, which there was, I like to go back and use that as like a spot to get paint. So I'm gonna kind of go steal paint from that so that it ends up at the same value as my other sections. One thing that's nice about using a big brush too is it holds a lot of water, so you don't have to go back and forth mixing up new water as you go. Now this is looking too much like a Christmas tree, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back and make a few of these stick out a little further, maybe connect a little bit, be a little bit wonky. This one might have kind of a bottom section and stick out more in the middle versus in the bottom, and this is kind of helping me make this tree feel a bit less like a pine tree and more like you know, whatever it is. I don't know what tree this is. Now you'll notice I tried to leave some white spaces so that we can see through to what's past this tree. That makes it feel more real because trees are not super dense. We'll paint a nice dense tree later, but this one has got separate sections of branches with different kinds of greens. Now, while it's still wet, I'm gonna start adding my second value, but the amount of water here is really key. So I'm gonna mix up a bit more of my paint. I want more pigment this time. So every time I wash my brush, I'm gonna take out most of the water. I only want enough water to wake up the color, but not to water it down. So I'm really looking for a heavy pigment amount, not a lot of water. Some might consider this to be milky or coffee. So the tea is the thinnest, some people mention, then it goes coffee, then it goes cream. Because I'm working wet on wet, I'm gonna try to get it to be very pigmented, otherwise it will bloom and bleed into places I don't want it to go. So that bloomed, but it didn't go everywhere. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna drip this paint in along the bottom of each of these sections, maybe a little bit in the middle, but generally what I'm wanting to happen is that it ends up at the bottom. Now, it bled a lot, more than I wanted it to. So what I can do is I can dry my brush and I can lift that water out. Dry it, lift, dry it, lift, dry it, lift. So I need to dry my brush every time I lift the paint out. Otherwise, I'm just gonna put the paint down in the next spot that I paint. I need to take that paint off of my brush. I can also use my tissue. So I could crumple up my tissue and go into each section and just lift a little bit of the top section out. It's hard to be as exact with a tissue or a paper towel, and so that's why I wanted to do the brush first, but that works. Now I'm gonna dry it all because I'm done with my wet on wet, and I'm gonna add more value with wet on dry. Okay, so now I'm doing wet on dry. So I'm gonna get more of my green paint. I probably have still quite a bit. You'll notice I'm not really changing the value of the paint. That's because in watercolor, it's transparent and I can go darker just by layering. I eventually might need to make it darker, but for now, I'm gonna see how dark I can push the same color I started with. Now, because it's dry, when I paint, it's going to have hard edges. So I'm gonna be careful to create the illusion of leaves when I paint these marks. So I'm dotting my brush. I'm letting some of those dots meet each other and blend together a little bit because that'll make it feel like a clump of leaves, not just polka dots. And so I'm trying to allude to this sort of texture that there are leaves on my tree. I don't want to cover up all of the light. So I'm trying to leave maybe like 30% of the tree as a light value so that I still have that bright highlight showing on each layer, but it's not everywhere. All right, I'm gonna dry that. All right, I know it's still looking like a Christmas tree. Our branches will help that. I'm gonna do one more layer, but this time I'm gonna switch my ratio and do more brown and less green. And I'm just gonna go in and add a few final shadows that have a bit more of a brown tone to them to really seem like they're muted. And that's just mainly along the bottom of each of these sections. Okay, and then I'm gonna switch to my small brush, my 2, and I'm gonna wake up my raw umber, and I'm gonna mix a little bit of my burnt or raw sienna, I think it's raw sienna actually, so that I get more of a chocolatey brown. That was too much sienna. There we go, that's a nice chocolatey color. So I'm trying to get it, again, pretty pigmented. You'll notice it's not a lot of water in this mixture. And I'm gonna start with my tree trunk. It's gonna be wider at the base and get kind of skinnier towards the tree. And I'll fill it on in. It's gonna stop when it touches the tree. Now the fun part is deciding where your branches go. It could be nice, I've got this little clump over here to do some little branches off there. I've got some open spaces in here, so there's some branches. I've got open space in the middle, so I want some branches, some tree trunk peeking through. Maybe there's a branch over here or over here. Maybe there's a little branch sticking out where there's no leaves, but the branch just kind of ends. So this is part of the fun, and this is one of the reasons we left some white space, was to allow for room to put these little tree branches. And little tree branches do kind of then finish the structure. This is no longer a pine tree and much more of a different kind of tree. If I were to do this one again, I do like on this one how these are a bit more spread out and mine were a little bit closer together. And so that's something that I would do differently if I did it again. But if you're looking at a reference photo, of course, you can kind of copy the structure of that tree. But the basic idea of this tree is that we started with our light and we gradually got darker. So let's try our next tree. In this tree, same sort of thing. We're gonna start with our green and we want it to be nice and light. So I'm gonna keep this mixture light. For this time, the shape is gonna be a bit more funky because why not? So I've still got my kind of triangle-esque top of the tree. That's pretty common because they oftentimes come to a point. But this time we're gonna make this kind of central clump of leaves really wonky. And look how I'm kind of stamping my brush so that there is some bits of white left and it's kind of an oblong, uneven shape. And I've got this part of it. So I like to use the side of the tip of my brush and just kind of push it down to make the different shapes that I'm doing. And then I've got this other section over here. That's kind of fun. So I'm gonna go ahead and do some little blobby guys that go off to the side so that I can have this tree have two kind of main structures. Maybe there was something in the way when it was growing. Maybe this is just where the light was based on trees around it. Who knows the story of the tree? We just get to paint it. All right, this time I'm gonna dry it first. I'm not gonna worry about the wet on wet, and we're just gonna jump right in with our next values, wet on dry. All right, so my tree is dry. I'm gonna mix up another batch of my green. It should be the same value, but what I'm gonna do is have less water. So a little bit of water to wake it up, of course, but not too dark. And my goal, again, is to cover up about 70% of my light with this middle medium tone. So I'm going from all light to light and medium. I like to try to include 3 values in each area of my picture to make it feel the most realistic without having to spend ages and ages. All right, that's my medium tone. While I'm here, I'm gonna go ahead and do the tree trunk. The tree trunk can really happen at any point in the painting. So for this tree trunk, because I'm still gonna go back and add more shadows, I'm gonna start and kind of make it kind of bend a little bit. So again, it starts wider and gets a little bit skinnier as it gets up to the tree. And make sure I got nice and lots of flow. And then as it goes up, it's gonna have this branch part that goes out. Look again how it always starts wide and gets skinnier. That's important for our trees. It's how they grow. You know, the newer growth is smaller. So if you want your nice realistic tree, keep that in mind as you're painting. I'm gonna try to get a few little branches kind of sticking out into these different little clumps, or even sticking out of the clumps to show that realism. Maybe there's another kind of branch coming up here. We're kind of wiggling and wobbling it and seeing what happens. Maybe a little branch over there. As it goes up here, we've got our base trunk in the middle. But then of course, we've got some other little branches that stick out in different directions. Even down here, maybe there's kind of a wide-ish branch kind of coming out over here, supporting those. So adding those branches is like a lot of fun. It kind of gives it personality. You don't need to go overboard. Not every branch is visible, but it is fun to give it a good number. Now, sometimes if I want to push it further, I might put a shadow kind of on one side of my tree trunk or on the bottom of some of those branches. So depending on how big your tree trunk is, adding more than one value, just like our leaves, can help push that further into reality. So keep that in mind. All right, let's go back to our last value of our leaves. So I'm gonna get a little bit more brown this time with my green. Again, I'm looking for less and less water to make it more and more pigmented. And a little bit extra brown this time. Now I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna try to do like 30% dark. So I've kind of done a third of each value is my goal by the end. This time my dots are much more spaced apart. They are not clumping together because these are those inner shadows that we can see kind of past. Now, one thing too I always forget to mention is that center by the tree trunk is probably gonna be the darkest overall because it's gonna have shadows from the clumps and things around it. So it's okay if not everything is equally shadowed and highlighted. Think about the logic of where that tree branch is, where the trunk is, where are those shadows gonna fall, and it's okay to kind of make those center areas a bit darker overall and let those highlights be more towards the outside edges. So something to keep in mind. And there we have it. I'm gonna dry it so we can see what it looks like all finished. All right, I'm gonna stop here for this video. We've got 2 trees using some of the same techniques. I want you to give those a try and let me know what you think. Do you have questions? Is there anything I can clarify further? And then I'll see you next time for our next 2 tree tutorials.